And a happy Wednesday evening to you. Welcome to Talkenomics Live. We are streaming live from Brooklyn, New York, and we're going to talk about quite a bit today. We're going to take a serious tone, and we're going to talk about hate speech and how social media is making a big profit on that and ways you can fight back. But first, we've got to talk a little bit about markets, and we're going to be hitting all of that with a very special guest who is someone I've known since my days a billion years ago at the Fox Business Network. Paul Schatz is the founder and president of Heritage Capital, and he has graciously acknowledged or accepted the invitation to join us tonight on Talkenomics. Paul, it's great to see you, and thank you for being here.
Great to see you, my friend.
I should also point out you were my first guinea pig. It was almost 2 years ago. I did a Zoom interview with you when I was at a different AI company, and we took that and we allowed the AI to write the article and also to suggest the edits. It didn't do the editing, it suggests the edits. So Paul is available for that kind of thing if you need to do any testing. But real quick, we're going to talk about markets. We're going to talk about NVIDIA, how to blow out earnings, where are they headed. We're going to talk about stagflation because the Fed seems to be afraid of all of that. We're going to hit all of those issues in the second half of this show. But I just want to let people know, if you are on YouTube, if you are on X, if you're on Twitter, as those of us over 40 call it, you can put your questions for Paul and our next guest into the chats for those different platforms, and we'll make sure that they get asked. But before I introduce the next guest, Paul, I just want to ask you real quick. In the cycle, the Wall Street cycle, how are you feeling right now? Because I'm one of those nervous, freaked out kind of people.
I feel great, but my personality is when markets decline and are coming out of a decline, I feel really great. I feel emboldened. I feel opportunistic. When we go straight up and we have those melt up moves like we saw in 2021 and 2019, 2017, in the last quarter of those melt up moves, I always get really, really nervous. So I feel great, right? I still think you can find value. The easy money clearly has been made because so many people during that 3-day plunge in early April, so many people panicked. And they let geopolitics get in the way of the data and rational decision making. So the easy money, is off that April low. Markets are kind of sort of back to equilibrium, although volatility remains elevated because of the heightened geopolitical tensions.
Okay, lazy investors like me do not like to hear you say the easy money has already been made. We will revisit that. But I want to turn things to something more serious, and I'm really grateful that you're here to help me in this part of the program, because for Jewish Americans and for Jews worldwide, it feels like open season, and God bless the IDF, God bless the people in Israel, because I don't think, we can kvetch, as they would say in Yiddish, about things we might experience, but the citizens of Israel, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Arab, the citizens of Israel are facing all kinds of craziness. But here in the United States, we too are facing craziness, not on the same degree, but it's still hate and it still is awful. And one of the organizations that's fighting that hate is the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL. And joining us now is Ari Hoffnung. He is the senior advisor on corporate advocacy at the ADL, and he's joining us because I think a lot of people who are Jewish, a lot of people who are Christian and involved with people who are Jewish who are upset by what we're witnessing in the United States are asking, what can I do? And the ADL has steps you can take in several different ways to push back and fight back. So Ari, it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Adam. It is great to be a guest on your program. And, when you talk about economics, when you talk about financial performance, you like to see that hockey stick growth, right? One type of graph you don't want to see is hockey stick growth when it comes to anti-Semitism and hate. And unfortunately, that is what we are witnessing. ADL has been studying these statistics for nearly 50 years. We are at a all-time high. You can go to adl.org to learn more about this. But in 2024, we had 9,354 recorded anti-Semitic incidents. That beat 2023 after the terrible events of October 7th in Israel. And things are headed in the wrong direction, both online and offline.
So let's talk about that. And I just got to put a plug in. My mom was director of the American Jewish Committee years ago in Miami. And one of the things from the experience, and I know some of the hate mail she used to get when she was in that role, anti-Semitism never went away. But the last 2 years, it's actually been more than the last 2 years, but it's been unleashed in ways that American Jews just have not witnessed on such a grand scale since October 7th. And yet, ADL and different affiliates of ADL and different organizations are pushing back. And for instance, right now, as we're speaking, there's an effort with Meta, the shareholders meeting with what I would call Facebook, because I'm over 40, but Meta, to deal with hate speech. So explain to us, what is Proposal 8 and when will we find out if it's going to make a difference?
Yeah, so Proposal 8 is a proposal that calls on Meta to issue a public report which details how the company is addressing anti-Semitism, anti-LGBTQ hate, and hate against people with disabilities. It's about giving the shareholders transparency into how the company is protecting its users. So that is on the ballot, was on the ballot today at the annual meeting that Meta hosted. We will know the results within the next 4 business days or so through a SEC filing. But here's why it's important, okay? Meta reaches, get this, Adam, over 3 billion users every day. That's 3 billion users every day. That's more than the entire populations of India and China combined. With
Wow.
$1 trillion plus market cap, and you've been following them for a long time, and over $150 billion in annual ad revenues, Meta has the moral responsibility to ensure that its platforms don't fuel anti-Semitism and hate. But Adam, this is not just a moral issue. We're talking about a business risk. Folks who follow Meta, analysts who follow Meta know that the company earns 97% of its revenue for advertising. Hate speech drives away users, it invites regulatory scrutiny, and it scares off advertisers. So, in our opinion, fighting hate isn't just about doing the right thing. It's necessary to protect the long-term shareholder value at Meta. And that is the fight we're fighting.
Let me bring Paul into this discussion, then I'll follow up afterward.
All right. And I know with people out there are forgetting about the core issue, but plenty of people are going to say, who's Meta to decide what is hate speech and what is not? So my question is, where do we draw the line where freedom of speech is no longer relevant and hate and we've crossed into just that horrible, despicable, disgusting hate speech? And who should be the arbiter of that?
Yeah, no, look, I totally appreciate the question, but let's think about that. The First Amendment protects us from government censorship, not from consequences on private platforms. Meta has every right and frankly a duty to enforce community standards to keep its 3 billion plus users safe. Let's be clear. Speech that incites violence or targets people for being Jewish, for being gay, or disabled, it's not free speech. We're talking about abuse. And this is not just the ADL saying this, even Meta's own oversight board, Paul, even their own oversight board warned that rolling back safeguards against hate is dangerous and irresponsible. So, of course, we support the First Amendment, but we are talking about a private company that is doing a terrible job protecting its 3 billion users. What does that mean long term for the company? What does it mean long term for shareholder value?
Um, Ari, I want to ask you a question about Instagram because that's a Meta property, and I noticed something about the algorithm based on my own doom scrolling. But something just popped into my head. Has the ADL ever sat down with Mark Zuckerberg? Has he ever honestly had a discussion with the ADL about how his platforms, his company is promoting? And it's not just anti-Semitism, but we're talking about all kinds of hate speech against different groups of people.
Well, there was the annual shareholder meeting. We had an opportunity to present Proposal 8, and that was presented for 3 minutes. So Mr. Zuckerberg heard this proposal. But I would say that ADL has been engaging with Meta for over a decade. For over a decade. We don't willy-nilly submit shareholder proposals. We submit shareholder proposals after we've exhausted all good faith discussions with a company. We have a ongoing dialogue with Meta. Meta is one of the most powerful companies on planet Earth, right? There was no Meta when you and I, where the three of us were growing up. It's hard to even describe how powerful and how influential Meta is on the entire planet. The ADL has been in dialogue with Meta for quite some time, really for over a decade. We speak to them on a regular basis. We submit incident reports to them when we see online hate. So there is ongoing dialogue with Meta. But when we hit a brick wall, and there's a brick wall behind me, when we hit a brick wall and we exhaust all good faith discussions with a company, that's when we take it to shareholders. Now, Adam, you know this, and Paul knows this. There's a dual class, this is corporate governance. There's a dual class share structure at Meta. So Mr. Zuckerberg essentially controls more than 60% of the vote. But I believe that when the vote is tallied, you will see independent shareholders. I'm talking about top 10 institutional shareholders. I think some of them will support this proposal. I think some of the largest pension funds will support this proposal
Ari, do
because
you know
people are
who's
concerned about long-term shareholder value and what this company is doing to erode it. Sorry, Paul. Go
it's
ahead.
all good. Do you know who's fighting the proposal? Have
I,
they
I well, the company's board has recommended a vote against it, but I will tell you that the two independent proxy advisors, right, Glass Lewis and ISS, have recommended to the people subscribed to their services to support it. So we hope that that this vote sends a message to the entire board, not only to Mr. Zuckerberg, that they need to do better fighting hate. Right? We're not asking them to engage in philanthropy and to solve, all of the world's problems. We're asking them to be proactive on the platforms they own and make sure that that they do not boost hate on their platforms. 41% of Jews, 41% of Jewish users try to hide their online identity. 41%. This
Ari,
is unbelievable.
or let me ask you about this. And I was my own little social
Yeah,
experiment with the algorithm. And
yeah,
I like many things that are
yeah,
pro Israel and pro IDF.
sure.
And I've noticed that in my Instagram feed, I get a ton of stuff that would echo my echo chamber. But I'm not going to say his name, but there's the young man from I think he's at Ohio State, who is being called out for his posts on TikTok
Hmm.
and on
Hmm.
Instagram, where he has been inciting people towards violence, especially after the murder of the two individuals who were gunned down because that individual thought they were Jewish going into a Jewish museum.
Yeah,
Regarding these algorithms, it's not just Instagram that uses those, TikTok uses those.
that's right.
And so how do you, I understand what Proposal 8 attempts to do, but
Yeah,
how do you stop that proliferation when I'm not, my echo chamber is supporting what I think, and I would imagine his echo chamber, as
that's right.
vile and awful as it is
Yeah.
supporting what those people think.
Look, ADL has something called the Center for Technology and Society. We engage with technology companies on a regular basis, and we engage in dialogue with them, and we urge them to do the right thing. We have gotten to a point with anti-Semitism now the way it is, that we must use every tool at our disposal to push back on hate. That's why we launched the first ever Jewish advocacy, Jewish values focused exchange traded fund on the New York Stock Exchange in late February. The ticker is TOV. People can check it out online. And what we do is we leverage the underlying assets in the 500 largest public companies in the United States to engage with companies. So when we engage with Meta, we don't only engage as a stakeholder, we engage as a shareholder. Meta is one of our largest holdings. We speak to investor relations, we speak to management, and we speak to board members, and we leverage our ability as shareholders to engage with them. Some companies that you mentioned, including TikTok, right? Those are private companies. X is now a private company. So there have to be other tools with them. But we will use every tool at our disposal to push back at online hate. And unfortunately, it's not just against Jews, it's
Right.
against people of color, it's against women, it's against gay folks, it's against the disabled. And Meta has walked this back to the point where their own oversight board is calling them out on it. These are not just advocacy organizations. Their own oversight board charged with overseeing has raised the alarm, has sounded the alarm. It is time for Meta to do the right thing and make sure that it does everything possible to protect its users and to stop boosting hate on its platforms.
So a couple things. One is I'm glad you pointed it out because I think, by the way, the ADL's website under the history section is an amazing read. It means it took me 10 minutes, but it's really an amazing read. It's not just about people who are in their silos and think it's just about fighting anti-Semitism. This goes way beyond anti-Semitism. So, and my question is, what other companies besides? I know you're involved with Meta and you're involved with Google, Alphabet, and Adam would say because I call it Google because we're over 40. The lady at the Red Cross this morning told me I look 38. What other companies are you guys trying to engage with to in a public setting to counter the proliferation of hate social media?
Yeah, great question. Look, um, sometimes we're confrontational to the company, right? We're on different sides of the table for Meta. Meta doesn't want to do this, and we are rallying shareholders, institutional investors, pension funds to push back on Meta and urge them to do the right thing. Sometimes we're on the side of the board. There's something called the BDS movement, the movement of people who are anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, and they preach boycotts, divestitures, and sanctions against companies doing business in Israel. And they use the proxy process to file anti-Israel resolutions on corporate proxy statements. When we see those statements, we run campaigns against those resolutions. The company also advises to vote against those resolutions. But a lot of those resolutions, you mentioned Alphabet, okay? Alphabet has a multi-year, multi-billion dollar Project Nimbus contract with the Israeli government. And we see the same rhetoric with weapon manufacturers. There are small number of people that are trying to deprive the state of Israel from access to weapons and technologies, entirely ignoring the security contacts, entirely ignoring the October 7th attacks by Hamas on Israeli civilians, and they are doing everything possible to use that system. Alphabet had to terminate more than 24 employees last year. It used to be, right, when we were growing up, if you wanted to protest the company, you stood with signs outside of the headquarters. So when the executives came in the morning or left at night, they saw it. Now they're being organized. Employees in the workplace are being organized by this movement. Imagine you're a Jewish employee showing up to a morning meeting, to an engineering meeting, and somebody next to you is wearing a t-shirt that says no more genocide for profit in Google colors, right? How does that make you feel as a Jewish employee? So our research shows that over 75 of the S&P 500 companies are being targeted by the hateful BDS movement. We work with companies and we work with shareholders to push back on this. And that's another reason why it was really important for us to launch the TOVE ETF, so that we were able to, as shareholders, push back on these very hateful proposals, which accuse Israel of genocide, which accuse Israel of war crimes, of being an apartheid regime, all sorts of inflammatory language, and fundamentally trying to deprive Israel of access to weapons and technologies. When we see hateful rhetoric, we push back. This is not about supporting the government of Israel, a left government or a right government. We push back when the state of Israel is delegitimized and demonized by haters.
We've been talking about social media, and one of the things that I've enjoyed when I doom scroll is when these young men and women go out and interview the protesters who are cosplaying in their cafes and the whole thing, and ask them, when you say from the river to the sea, and they can't tell you which river and they can't tell you which sea, they have no clue what they're talking about. But I don't think they're going to go away. BDS has been around since about 2005, 2006. Ari, I just want to remind everyone, because we have people who are watching on Twitter and on YouTube, you can ask Ari a question, you can ask Paul a question. Please share your questions. We will make sure that they get heard. Just put them into the chat and we will share them with Ari. Ari, I want to take a step back.
Please.
Because we've been talking about Proposal 8 at Meta. We'll find out within the next 4 days through their filing with the SEC what happens with the proposal. June 6th, I believe, is the Alphabet shareholders meeting, and there's the continual BDS attempts. We'll find out what happens on June 6th. At ADL, what do you hear from employees within companies, Jewish employees, who might be afraid to speak up within their work environment? Do they contact ADL? Do they reach out to you and say, look, this is happening, what do I do?
Yeah, absolutely. And we certainly can't, not in a position to disclose any company names, but when employees at different companies, many of the times public companies, many of the times technology companies have issues, they often turn to ADL, and we have a whole network of regional offices that folks can reach out to, and we provide support to the full extent possible. We have something called the Jewish ERG network, right? There's something, employee resource groups. Some companies call it affinity groups. That is a way in many companies, including Alphabet, which has, I believe, a group called the Juglers, that allows people who identify being Jewish to come together in kind of a safe space. Today, Jewish employees are facing hate in the workplace, right? So people are bringing their identity to work. They're seeing it on Slack. They're seeing it in the clothing that people show up with. So there's a lot of technology, and has really created new concerns in the workplace that just a decade ago really didn't
Well,
exist.
Nike, there was that ridiculous when Nike, I think it was the London marathon, when they put up that huge billboard, never again.
That's right.
Making, I can't even use the words because we're talking about the Holocaust there. I have Nike running shoes, but my next pair is going to be Adidas. To heck with Nike.
Adam, I'm the grandson of Holocaust survivors, and when I saw the words "never again" being used to promote the sale of sneakers in the London Marathon, I was shocked and outraged. We are engaging with Nike on this very issue, and I hope that they will do the right thing. I understand that they made a mistake. Everyone makes a mistake. People are human. Mistakes can be made. But what is really telling is when a company, a company with $50 billion plus in annual revenues, and a global brand like Nike makes a mistake, what's telling is what they do after they make a mistake and what actions companies like Nike take. And we're really hoping that Nike steps up to the plate and shows us what type of meaningful action a company that made a mistake could really take. That was really an outrageous ad campaign that they ran there.
Ari, when you engage with companies and you have evidence of, we'll say, hate environment, hate speech, hostile work environment, what do the companies push back on? When you go to company X and say, this is what we learned happened with your employees, and I'm sure they don't say, oh yeah, it's happening, we'll stop it. How do they push back, and what are they saying?
Look, we don't like to get involved on the individual basis with an employee who has a problem with their boss. I mean, there can be a lot of different reasons why that happens. But if we see patterns, in certain companies and certain sectors. That's when we engage with companies. We'll speak to their CHROs, we'll speak to their legal teams, we will offer educational resources to them. We offer something called Anti-Semitism 101, a digital module, which now goes on online learning management systems that many companies are using. So we are here as a resource for companies. Sometimes we're confrontational, but a lot of the times we want to be supportive. How can we help you educate your workforce? How can we help bring expertise and resources into your company so you can sensitize your workforce to these issues so they don't run campaigns to sell sneakers with the words never again?
Ari, does the ADL have partners outside of the Jewish world in these efforts with like Proposal 8, and not just the organizations which have endorsed this, but for instance, in the gay and lesbian world, the Human Rights Campaign? Are there allies who are joining forces with ADL on these efforts?
Yes, I mean, depending on the issue, we often work closely with allies, and we welcome allies on all of these issues. We deplore all forms of hate. Our focus, of course, is combating anti-Semitism, but we understand that all forms of hate must be combated, and that's why Proposal 8 at Meta not only focused on Jewish users, but also on gay users and disabled users, because those are the users that our experts found are experiencing the lion's share of hate online.
I think most people don't realize the ADL is fighting hate of all different kinds. So this morning when I was reading on the website about what you guys are doing online to combat hate, I have to remember, is it Backspace Hate? Is that the program?
We have a lot. We have a lot of different programs to combat hate. We have technology experts, PhD level technology experts, who really work with companies on their policies to make sure that companies are proactive in combating hate. One of the things Meta did, for example, is it eliminated the layer of checks and balances that it had with content moderation, kind of pushing it to the users using the X model. Now, in the short term, Paul, they may save a few bucks, but we think they're causing irreparable harm to their brand, and they really need to turn back the clock on this.
When I asked you about Zuckerberg, has there ever been, and I don't know if you can actually answer it, but I believe he's Jewish. Has anybody just ever sat down with him and said, "Hey, as you pointed out, you control 60% of the vote here, the shares. What are you doing?" Has there
Yeah.
ever been that kind of one-on-one with this individual?
So ADL at the most senior level, Jonathan Greenblatt, our CEO, regularly engages with peers throughout different industries, and particularly in the technology industry. We never disclose specific conversations, but
Hmm.
rest assured, people at the highest levels of Meta understand what the issues are, understand our perspective on these issues, but have really put up a brick wall and are trying to walk back any type of mechanism to combat online hate. We are very disappointed. The fight will go on no matter what the vote result is, and we think it's going to be positive. Shareholder resolutions are advisory to the board. Mr. Zuckerberg controls the board. We will be looking for other ways to engage with Meta and to rally institutional support and to rally users, to ask them, to call on them to do better. Meta has a moral responsibility. It has over 3 billion users on planet Earth. How many companies can say that it influences the lives of 3 billion people, right? This is truly extraordinary power it yields. And with that power comes responsibility. Adam, Meta turned 21 in February, right? It was launched in a college room at Harvard by Mr. Zuckerberg. Now they're an adult. It's time to grow up. It's time to do better. It's time to take responsibility. You're not a scrappy startup anymore without resources to do the right thing. We all know they have abundance of resources to do the right thing. It's the right thing to do, and it's good for their business and long-term shareholder value.
Ari Hoffnung, really appreciate your being here. He is the Anti-Defamation League's senior advisor on corporate advocacy. Didn't even get a chance to ask you about New York City since you were once a deputy comptroller. I mean, $70 billion budget. I hope you'll come back so we can bash the city budget at some point and talk about what's happening. But Ari, thank you so much. All the best to you and the folks at the ADL. And let's see what happens with Proposal 8 and then the efforts June 6th with Alphabet.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Paul. Real pleasure.
You too.
Paul, real quick before we start talking markets and grab the pearls because of the Fed and stagflation, was anything that jumped out to you that you heard from Ari? I mean, it seems like this is one of those, who's the Greek, pushing the boulder from mythology up the hill? Sisyphus? I forget the name, but...
certainly above my pay grade.
I think your pay grade's pretty good. You're the founder of Heritage. But they're trying to make an effort, but it just seems like this evil genie has been unleashed.
It is. I thought in my mind, I kind of remember 1999 when anti-Semitism and hate. This is thousands of years old, but I kind of remember when kind of the Eurozone came together. That's when anti-Semitism started bubbling up in France, and it spited around the world. I never thought, and I grew up I was born in the 60s, but I never thought we'd be here where you're making legitimate comparisons to the Holocaust. I mean, the most unspeakable acts in human history. And yet here we are. And I don't want to say it's a modern day Holocaust, but it's certainly beyond an epidemic. I mean, look, we were talking about Facebook Meta a minute ago. I was reading a story the other day, and I couldn't believe the comments. It was like 90% are just vitriolic, despicable, disgusting, makes you want to vomit, because everyone's so tough behind a keyboard.
Yeah.
People standing face to face. I'm sure there are ones who are up for a fight physically, but most people are really tough behind their keyboards, and that's what the worst thing about social media.
It is a different world, and I'm going to go back 1,000 years when I was a reporter in Indianapolis, and the Klan was getting ready to march on the state capitol. This was in the late 90s. And there was a member of the Klan who used to call me. He was my secret source. And he used to refer to himself as the White Shadow after that TV show, the basketball coach. And I used to laugh.
One of my favorite shows.
And I said to him one day, because I met him in person, and this is a member of the Klan. And I said to him, why do you share all this information with me? It was all off record. He was off record. Let me rephrase that. His identity was off record. I was allowed to use the stuff he shared with me. I said, but I'm Jewish. Why are you sharing this with me? He said, well, I like you. It's bizarre because you get that face to face with the crazy. I remember getting a hate letter when I was in Indianapolis, and they're saying, pull, your Jewish anchor off the air, but they referred to me as a star. So I was like, yeah, I'm a star. It's great. Back then you could laugh about it, but now it takes on, I mean, we have people who weren't alive when that was happening with me in Indianapolis, who are now adults who are inciting people, and you get two young souls gunned down simply because the gunman thought they were Jewish outside a Jewish museum. And it's not something we can laugh at.
No, and listen, we can all pull up, tragedies in the Tree of Life, and you can keep going back. What scares me and continues to terrify me is that it keeps getting worse. There's no end in sight. I mean, what has gone on at universities is just, it makes you, first, obviously makes you beyond angry, but I can't fathom it. And if you listen to, Alan Dershowitz, and he talks about at Harvard, the Divinity School and the School of Health or Public Policy from the 20s and the 50s, how talking about the Klan and Nazism, and it's just modern day. We should have evolved past that. And my one hope for humanity on this is if you go to Jerusalem, Christians, Muslims, and Jews all live in peace in one city. So how is that possible in that one city where it should be the most, the nerve should be the most frayed, and yet we can't do it around the world?
It's a good point. I'm going to change the subject because
Let's do that.
There is cause for optimism, because there are an equal number of young people who are fighting a good cause. And if you doom scroll on TikTok or on Instagram, hopefully your algorithm will find them. But I want to switch gears, Paul, because your background in finance is something that we need to hear and discuss. And a good old fashioned, let's talk about the Fed and those FOMC minutes, because when I said to you at the beginning of the program, of the live stream, that I freak out sometimes, I hear the word stagflation. I haven't heard that since you and I were probably playing with Tonka, trucks as kids.
G.I. Joe and the Kung Fu Grip.
Yeah, there you go. And it was the tall G.I. Joe, not the wimpy little G.I. Joe.
I think his friend was Mike.
Oh.
Yeah. And we grew up in the 70s, so we knew about stagflation and we knew about historic inflation. And I still remember the gas lines with my parents, sitting in the back of the car. You had an even plate number, you had a odd license plate number. Look, I have been a vocal critic of the Fed, not just the Powell Fed, but Yellen, but Bernanke. To me, Greenspan was the worst of the modern era. And I don't include Arthur Burns in there from the 70s. I feel like the Fed, I thought they were fighting the wrong battle in 2021. It was clear to me, and I wrote about it ad nauseum, that they should have been raising rates a quarter point every other meeting starting at the end of 2020. And now I think they're fighting inflation. Inflation's under wraps. So if any viewer pulls up a chart of crude oil, go back 5 years, no good economist could argue that we have an energy issue. I get the supply chain issues and I understand the food issues. I do shop at the grocery store. I happen to enjoy that. But they're fighting the wrong battle yet again. Bernanke fought the wrong battle in 2007, and 3 members of the Fed wanted to raise rates in the middle of 2008 as the world is coming to an end. So I think they're wrong. I think they're so wrong yet again. And what they'll do is, when we get to a point down the road, they're going to do the "oops, we did it again," Britney Spears, and they're going to quickly have to play catch up and cut rates. So I'm not worried about stagflation. No.
So you and I first met back during the financial crisis, my Fox days, and I remember covering the Fed. And there was a paper, I forget which Fed bank president wrote this, or it might have been one of the governors, but that they were examining whether they would change their policy. And the policy at that point was, even when they knew there was an asset bubble that was inflating, they would not take steps to deflate it. They would rather clean up after the fact. And I've never truly understood Fed speak or the wonkiness of it. But given what you just said, the Fed keeps making mistakes. So how do we get out of this? Because they're going to do something, and Wall Street's betting on a rate cut at the end of the year now.
But so I argued strongly, Fed should have cut rates in March. They should have cut a quarter in March. They were about a half a point behind the curve. They didn't cut in March, and then I thought maybe they'll see the light and they'll do the quick pivot, the dovish pivot. They didn't do that. May, they didn't cut and they didn't dovishly pivot. It's unlikely they're going to cut in June. And you just mentioned it. They are crisis managers on the way up. Look, the wealth effect, we know the wealth effect is arguably the most powerful economic tool the world's ever known. So I feel like on the way up, they'd rather not prick the bubble. They let the bubble go because they don't know how far the bubble's going to go, and they don't know what kind of economic growth they'll get from the bubble. A la, the dot-com bubble, the Y2K bubble. They just pumped the system with insane amounts of money. And then obviously when it got pricked on March 10th of 2000, we 80% decline in those stocks. I feel like when they become members of the Fed, they get their DNA changed, because nobody would do this if you were running a company or trying to run a financial market. The life of me, I cannot figure out why they continually wait for the signs of a crisis before saying, aha, when so many people out there are already seeing the crisis.
They're kind of like the scene at the end of Casablanca or in the middle of Casablanca, rather. I'm shocked to find gambling in this establishment. You're winning, sir. Let's shift gears real quick. NVIDIA, beat on revenue, beat on earnings per share. I mean, I keep hearing the death of the Mag 7. I don't know what's going to happen with Tesla. I'm not a stock picker, but sales off 50% in Europe. I don't know how they get on top of that. But when you said easy money, here's how I'm going to ask you to define easy money, because, and you did this for me 2 years ago in that guinea pig interview we did. But when you say easy money, what I think easy money is, you could have just invested in an S&P index fund because the Mag 7 were driving it. But now that bet's off, or is it?
I don't think it's off. So easy. So first, I'm looking at Palantir. I'm looking at NVIDIA after hours. Stock's trading really well, clear, but I think its days of those double-digit monumental moves that you're just holy geez on are over. It is similar to Apple and Google and Meta and Netflix. With each successive earnings report, the market's less surprised. The ranges of outcomes are coming in, and that's good. That's a stock maturing. So growth rates are going to come down. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the maturity of a company. I'm not worried. Easy money off of market bottoms, and you could pick the 2022 bottom. You could pick the 2020 bottom. That first leg usually comes when the masses just literally all throw in the towel together and wipe their hands. They just want to feel better for a day, a week, a month. And that's usually the low. And the markets have evolved. So these V-shaped lows have become more of the norm. That was never the case. Usually V-shaped bottoms are the result of a quick Fed pivot after 9/11, COVID, 1998 long-term capital. Mm-hmm. And now, at least with this bottom, there was no Fed pivot. It looks like a V at the April 7th bottom. And the market just literally, from those V bottoms, they just scream higher and trap all the bears, people who sold on the outside looking in, and they melt straight up linear fashion until they're done. And then they will start to go sideways, like I think we're going to do now.
The futures are indicating that you speak truth here, because we were just showing what CNBC has got. Futures are trading higher after NVIDIA. Do you think that the market is dismissing we hear the pontificators on CNBC and on Bloomberg and on Fox Business talk about tariff volatility and all of that? Do you think the markets are past the volatility and discounting that this could blow up in July?
No. Here's what I've thought all along. No, not all along. Since what was it called? Liberation
Day. I think it was April 2nd.
So I argued, and I'll still argue, the first 9% decline from the February 19th peak, that was all from Walmart. Or let's call it 8 out of 9% was Walmart and their growth scare, because we learned that when the $660 billion true tariff plan came out, over those 3 days, the market just literally plunged 10%. And then each successive tweet, announcement from the administration about we're 50% tariffs, we're rolling them back, we're 120% tariffs, rolling them back. Each successive announcement has brought a lower magnitude response in the markets. My argument is this, and I've said this for many months. At some point this year, Q3, Q4, the administration is going to talk about some wild tariff plan, and everyone's going to go, oh my gosh, and the market's going to rally that day. And then you'll know the market's fully priced in tariffs and moved on to something else. And I would argue that that something else is going to either be deregulation, which is an enormously powerful tool that's coming, or so they say, and whatever extension of the 2017 tax cuts. I just don't think what the House proposed, the Senate's going to easily pass. I think we're in for some very public making of the sausage. People are going to get super frustrated, even in their own party. That eventually obviously gets passed. Hopefully, it has some stimulus to it, but is at least fiscally prudent.
Just a few more questions, because I promised you an out time, which I've already passed. But, as people who really love the fact that we are citizens of the United States of America, when I hear and I read the articles that I take seriously about the decline, they will say, of the U.S. Economically, where do you stand? Because I think don't ever bet against the United States.
So my view is this, and I tell my kids this: as you get older, you get some curmudgeonness, whatever. Some enters into, like, so I have a lot of clients who are, pre-retirees and retirees. That's our focus. And I know clients have had for 10, 20, 30 years, they were never like they are today. And as they get older, they always say, America's best days are behind her. Oh my gosh, Social Security is going insolvent. No, it's not. No, it's not. Every generation does as they age. They get a little saltier. I would argue strongly, and listen, I run an investment advisory business, so you know where my money is. America's days are the best days are in front of her, and they will always be in front of her as long as the dollar remains the world's reserve currency. That is the single biggest privilege any country knows in the history of the world. We are taking it for granted, but as long as that remains the case, we have the ability to sell debt like no other country on earth. We need to get our fiscal house in order. But I absolutely dismiss when people said America's best. Look what we've accomplished just since the internet, really came full circle. 25 years ago? Mm-hmm. I mean, we're talking about flying cars and autonomous cars and driverless trucks. We're only in the infancy of AI. So I would never, I think it's an emotionally dumb move to bet against the American economic machine. Not that it was perfect, and we're gonna listen. Capitalism, they say, is the worst of all systems except for everything else out there.
Right.
You're gonna have the busts. That's part of capitalism.
Yeah, I'm a little worried that we're about to elect a socialist in New York City, not because the position on certain things, it's the position on certain stances this individual's taking without explaining how to pay for it. If you can explain how to pay for it in a way that won't drive people out of New York State, because just raising taxes on people in New York State is an open door to go to Florida. But let me ask you this.
But it is cyclical, Adam. Look, go back in our last 100 years, these times where socialism gets a toehold somewhere, it is cyclical and it ebbs and flows. We're in a bad spot in the global cycle right now. You can argue it started in 2008 and it's going to end at some point, I'll say in the next 5 years or so, but we're in that bad cycle from this. Look, the Great Depression was pretty bad. I wasn't alive, but my grandparents were, and they were obviously alive for the Holocaust, as my great-grandmother was. You get these horrific times in the globe. They always lead to amazing periods of happiness and bliss and expansion. We're going to get there. Maybe it's the 2030s, but I wouldn't bet against the markets, and I certainly would have bet against America.
So now I'm going to wrap up with one last question for you, because it's my favorite question when I first launched Talkenomics, and it gets to who you are as an individual. And I am just curious, because I have known you for so many years, and I am grateful that you always say yes when I need some help with something for news that I'm reporting or writing. What drew you? What made you, as a younger person, decide to go into this line of work?
So my friends and family, and they like to call, I was Alex P. Keaton when I was like 7, 8 years old. I would read, my dad would come home. I would pick out his Wall Street Journal. And I owned one stock when I was a kid, American Standard. They made toilets. And my argument when I was a little kid was, what is the country always going to need? Toilets. So I always had that stock. And I was 7, 8 years old. I've always been attracted to the markets. Always. I was doing research in high school on markets, with legal pads and pens on planes, trains, hanging out at home. I was always, I was addicted to it as a kid. And I went to work on Wall Street out of college. And then I really wanted to open my own business and help people, one-on-one. But I love the markets. If tomorrow someone said, here's $1 billion, what are you going to do? I'm coming to work the next day. If you ask me when I'm going to retire, my clients know I'm hoping for 80, and I just turned 59. I never want to do anything else. I have my hobbies. a lot of them, and I love spending time with my family. But this to me is a lifelong passion, obsession, addiction.
That is a wonderful way to end this episode of Talkenomics. Paul Schatz, the founder and president of Heritage Capital. It is always good to see you, my friend. And next time you're in Manhattan, I owe you not only a coffee, but I've discovered this little pastry. I think it's Portuguese. It's called pastel de nata. Although,
I'm in.
You know, yeah, oh, they're amazing. I want to say,
couple of weeks, I'm in.
Okay, you give me a call, and really, thank you for helping me in the discussion with Ari. I'm just going to close. Usually at the end of the program, I've started doing this thing called My Talk, but I'm just going to say Am Yisrael Chai, and thank you all for joining us tonight on Talkenomics.